Let's start. Welcome and congratulations, everyone. I know it's been a long process getting here, but we are here now. My name is Glenn Saponis. I'm the Executive Director here at the Trust. And today's workshop is for you grantees who are getting a HSM grant, one of our planning grants, either Historic Site Management, Heritage Tourism, MCRPs, and the like. But again, congratulations. And one thing perhaps you might not be aware of, but actually the governor has actually signed this legislation. So we are actually moving forward. So he signed it on December 23rd. An early holiday present for us all, I guess. So next slide, please, Kristen. So again, we are the New Jersey Historic Trust. We've been around since 1967. Providing grants since 1990. The mission has remained relatively the same, perhaps expanding a little bit more with heritage tourism and some other educational and stewardship type stuff. But again, we've been here for a while now. Next slide, please. So for those of you who might not know, the Historic Trust Board, which governs basically what the Historic Trust does, is comprised of 12 citizen members, basically appointed by the governor, as well as 3 ex officio members representing both the Department of Community Affairs, where the trust now officially sits after 20 years of trying, as well as the Department of Community Affairs, Environmental Protection, and Department of Treasury. We, along with Green Acres, Farmland Preservation, Blue Acres, are all part of the constitutionally dedicated Preserve New Jersey Fund. These are monies that come from the state corporate business tax that are dedicated to doing preservation work, including historic trust and historic preservation work. Next slide, please. So the staff of the trust, as you see, I'm here, as well as Carrie, who's the fiscal officer, and you'll see all of the preservation specialists on the right, most of who, or a big chunk of who you will hear from today, basically preparing you to manage your grant. So again, I just want to say congratulations on getting here, and we look forward to working with you as we develop your grant agreements and your projects as to move forward. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to another staff person, Tara Ritz.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Tara, and I'm a preservation specialist here at the Trust. To start us off, I'll be giving an overview of what we'll be discussing today. So this is a webinar, which means that the staff online today can't see you or hear you as attendees. In order to communicate with us, we have access to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. Any questions you have can be typed in that designated section. We'll address any questions that are entered at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the webinar itself. We'll be able to answer questions either verbally or directly into the Q&A chat function. Also, just to note, this presentation is being recorded, and you'll receive an email sometime next week with a link to it. So the recording will also become live on our website sometime next week, and that will be located under the Resources tab at our homepage. So you can follow along today. Here's our agenda. First, we will briefly go over the grant agreement process, the grantee info packet, and the grant manual materials. Then the rest of the trust staff will discuss how we execute the grant agreements, how we define the scope of work, archaeological requirements, how to administer an active grant, how you close out a grant, and project publicity. And again, as previously mentioned, there will be time at the end of this where we can address any remaining questions you might have. So the grant agreement process, the first step of the grantee process is to attend this workshop. So congratulations, everyone. You've successfully completed the first step. We are very happy to have all of you here today. Your next step as grantees is to submit any supporting documentation in relation to your project and your grantee info packet. After the trust receives that information, we'll assemble those materials and send you 2 original copies of the finalized grant agreement for signature. Once you sign that and follow the procedures laid out in the manual, you'll need to mail that back to us. We then send that upstairs to the fiscal office here at DCA, and the grant agreement will be opened and executed. Once the grant agreement is executed and all reporting documents are submitted, signage is in place and the easement is in place if one is required for you. The agreement is open and active, and you'll be able to submit for reimbursements. Grant materials and manual. There are two primary materials for you as grantees. The first is the grantee info packet, which you should have already received in an email from the trust staff earlier in the month. This is a crucial document in executing the grant agreement. We can't move forward until this is fully completed and submitted to us. So please print your info packet out, fill it out, and compile all the certifications and resolutions and mail that physical copy into us at the trust by March 27th. Additionally, we have the grant manual, which is a step-by-step guide outlining the grant agreement process and reiterating what we will explain in this workshop today. This is a really, really great resource, and it's very helpful for you as you go through the grant process, so please take advantage of that. Resources on our website. So the manual is available along with other resources on our webpage, njht.org. On our homepage, there will be a big resources tag at the top of the page, which you can see an example of on your screens. And if you click on that, excuse me. And if you drop that tab down, there is a specific for grantees section. If you click on that, there will be different breakdowns depending on your grant type and the subcategories with PDF documents of a number of different resources that can be helpful to you throughout the process. And now I'm going to pass it off to Carrie, who will be discussing executing the grant agreement.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Hogan, and I'm the Trust Fiscal Officer. Today, I'll be covering the checklist of documents in your grantee info packet, which, as Tara mentioned, you should have received via email within the last week or two. These documents are required to draft and execute your grant agreement. So the quicker you get these forms completed and handed off to your trust program officer or PO, the faster your grant agreement can be drafted and executed. The trust can't process any reimbursements without a fully executed grant agreement, so it's important that these come through. So the first form in your grantee info packet is the checklist. The checklist itself, along with all the items on it, needs to be completed and returned to your program officer by March 27th. These are the essential forms that we use to create your grant agreement contract. After the checklist itself, the first item you need to provide is the letter of acceptance. The second page of the letter of acceptance needs to be filled out completely and signed. By signing the letter of acceptance, you are agreeing to abide by the regulations that now govern this grant program, including the requirement to inform your program officer of all new developments and meetings that pertain to your grant project. Your PO should receive copies of all documentation for review and approval before proceeding with any work. Next on the checklist is the information form seen here. This simple form covers all of your basic info, but it's critical to the grant agreement process. One especially important aspect of this form is providing an accurate EIN number for your organization or entity, so that we can verify that you are properly set up as a payee in the state's financial system. Please note for this year that you do not have to register an NJ Start in order to receive grant funds. This is a new process, a different process. No grant recipients need to register an NJ Start. So here's how it works instead. For brand new first-time grantees that are 501 nonprofit organizations, you should submit a W-9 questionnaire to Treasury at this email seen here, the treasury.nj.gov. Treasury will then enter that information and they will establish a payment profile in the state's financial system for you. For municipal, county, and state grantees, you are likely already in the state's financial system under your EIN number because you've probably received a grant payment or a previous payment of some type in the past. So with your EIN number, we can verify that you're in the system. Previous grantees that already have an NJ Start V vendor number, you can continue to use that to access your profile by logging into NJ Start. If you have problems or questions or any issues at all with getting yourself set up in the financial system, please contact the vendor help desk directly. So all grantees have the option to sign up for ACH automatic payments. We highly recommend this. These are electronic payments that deposit grant reimbursements directly into your organization's chosen bank account, instead of waiting for a paper check to be cut by state treasury, processed, and then delivered via U.S. mail. With ACH, the funds are transferred immediately. To set up ACH, you will need to fill out the non-procurement ACH form and instructions. If you have questions or need assistance, contact OMB Vendor Control. ACH is easy and simple, and it will expedite your grant payments. One note though, with this option, if you change banks at any point while your grant is still open and you're expecting payments, you must fill out a new ACH form and submit it with all the correct details to Treasury, or else that payment will not make it to you. So next on your checklist is proof of insurance. All grantees must maintain insurance coverage for the entire term of the grant agreement. Grantees must provide a certificate of insurance, also known as a COI accord. This is a standard document that your insurance company is familiar with and can easily provide to you. So I would get in touch with your insurance company now and let them know that you need one. Please note that the New Jersey Historic Trust must be named as additionally insured in the lower left box of the accord document seen here. Please also include your project number on the certificate. This way we can match up any subsequent accord certificates to your project file. Grantees must submit a COI accord to the trust before the grant agreement can properly be executed. If this is missing, actually, if any of this is missing or incomplete in any way, the process will be delayed, unfortunately. So next we have the attachment E, governing body board resolution. This is an important document. Your governing body needs to pass an official resolution certifying, 1, that the amount of your grant has been awarded to you, and 2, the name and title of the individual authorized to sign the grant agreement on your organization's behalf. The person named in your resolution must be the same individual who ultimately signs the grant agreement contract. The resolution must have original signatures of the person approving the resolution, as well as the person attesting to the approval. So approved by and attest by can't be the same person. All resolutions must be certified with a government, corporate, or notary seal or stamp. So if your board secretary or your official does not have a stamp, you must take your resolution to a notary for certification when you sign it. In fact, most grantees use the notary, so there's no question as to whether or not the approved signature is properly certified. Resolutions that are not properly certified won't be accepted, and you'll have to get another one. And this can significantly delay your grant agreement if you only have board meetings every quarter, for example. So it's a good idea to get this resolution on your next governing board meeting's agenda, and so you have it in hand to send to your PO by March 27th. All right, so next we have the attachment G, statement of adequacy of accounting system. Your CFO or treasurer must review the requirements of the grant agreement, including state required audits and reporting, and then sign this form. By signing, your financial officer is agreeing to be responsible for establishing and maintaining the financial statements for your grant. Your CFO or treasurer is also the same person that certifies and signs reimbursement requests. They sign all payment voucher reimbursements. Please note that your CFO treasurer that signs this attachment G cannot be the same person authorized by resolution to execute the grant agreement. They have to be two different people. Having two different people provides the necessary checks and balances of healthy accounting and oversight. Once you've completed all the forms in your grantee info packet, mail it to your program officer at the trust right away so that they can prepare your scope of work and get that grant agreement draft going. Remember that the trust needs all original signed documents. Do not send photocopies of these forms within the info packet. Once the PO has received everything that they need, 2 original copies of the grant agreement will be sent to you for signature and return. Upon return with original signatures, Glenn Saponis, our executive director, will countersign, and an official within DCA Fiscal Affairs will also sign it. Finally, the fully executed grant agreement will be mailed back to you, the grantee. You keep one original copy, one remains with us here at the trust. Please make sure that your copy of the grant agreement stays somewhere safe and easily accessible. This contract is a living document while your grant is open, and it should be used by the project contact and team as a guide for compliance, reporting, submitting reimbursement requests, and following mandatory guidelines. So next I'll be handing off, I think, to Judy for defining the scope of work.
Yes. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Murphy, and I'm going to be taking you through defining the scope of work. The main component of the grant agreement that deals with the scope of work is attachment D1. This form establishes the project that's being funded and the costs associated with each component of the project. The information included in the D1 is based off the scope of work that was submitted with the application for funding, unless changes were made by the trust during the application period. Over the next few weeks, program officers will start drafting the D1s and sending them to grantees for review to ensure that we have all the correct information. Once it's reviewed and okayed by the grantee and we have your completed info packet, we can then begin formulating your grant agreement. Every D1 will have a heading including general information about the grant, such as the name of the grantee, the project name, the project number, and the grant award amount. The first section of the D1 is a brief history and statement of significance for the site, as well as a short description of the project being funded. The second section establishes the trust as the primary project review authority and describes the review requirements for the grants. The third section is where we list all the activities being funded by this grant. For example, if your scope of work is for a conditions assessment and archaeological report, they would be listed individually under this section. This allows both you as the grantee and the trust to clearly see what deliverables you will be responsible for at the end of your project. Under the third section, the estimated costs for each activity being funded by the grant will be listed. All the amounts found in this section are based off the submitted proposals from your consultant. The proposal is also included as an exhibit in the grant agreement. Our HSM, Heritage Tourism, and Planning grants are reimbursed in 2 payments. The first payment is for 80% of the grant amount, and the second payment is for the final 20%. That second payment is received upon the closeout of the grant. The dollar amounts associated with those reimbursements will be provided in your D1. The final component of the D1 is the project schedule. These are important dates associated with your project, including the commencement date of your grant and the expiration date of your grant. I recommend keeping these on hand or posted somewhere where you can see them so that you're aware of all the deadlines and you can plan your grant funded work accordingly. Here we have the project schedule for our 2025 HSM, Heritage Tourism, and Municipal Planning grants. The schedule is based off the day the governor signs the appropriation bill for these grants, which in this case happened to be on December 23rd, 2025. This date is known as the agreement commencement date. For most of you, the date the bill is signed will also be considered the work period commencement date. For those that started work prior to this date, we ask that you please provide your program officer with the date you actually began work so that it can be reflected in the D1. We have 18 months from the day the governor signs the appropriations bill to execute the grant agreement. This is known as the agreement execution date, which is June 23rd, 2027. You must also begin within that 18-month period, begin work in that 18-month period. This is considered your project commencement deadline. We do recommend that you execute your agreement sooner rather than later. You can't receive your first reimbursement until the grant agreement is fully executed, as Carrie mentioned. The funded project must be completed within 2 years of the agreement commencement date on December 23rd, 2027. The agreement itself will expire 3 years after the agreement commencement date on December 23rd, 2028. This allows you extra time after the work is completed to close out the grant. Extensions on these grants are not guaranteed and are only advised in extenuating circumstances. They must be requested and then approved by our Grants and Loans Committee. So we encourage you to work closely with your consultant to ensure that you meet the grant deadlines, because it may be hard to get an extension if your agreement expires. Next. Project team. All consultants working on the grant-funded project must be approved by trust staff and must meet our professional qualification standards. If you included resumes and project proposals from consultants in your original application, they are considered approved unless you have been informed otherwise. If you did not include consultants in your original application, you must submit resumes and project proposals to your program officer to have them approved by the trust before work can begin. If you are unsure if your project team is appropriate or if they have been approved by trust staff, please contact your program officer. When you submit your initial reimbursement request, we do require a copy of a signed agreement or consultant contract. We need to have this on file to process your reimbursement. All work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. A large part of your program officer's job is to review the submitted work to ensure it meets the standards. Consideration of archaeology or the archaeological potential of your site is required for all preservation planning documents. Alexis will go into some more detail about that shortly. Finally, all preservation plans and historic structure reports funded by the trust must meet the content requirements laid out in the Historic Structure Reports and Preservation Plans, a preparation guide. It's extremely important that the grantee, as well as the consultant, are aware of the requirements listed in the guide. Program officers use the checklist of required sections and information within that guide to review those types of documents, so we highly recommend reviewing it. The Preparation Guide, second edition, can be found on our website under our Resources tab in the For Grantees section that Tara mentioned earlier. If you have any trouble locating it, please contact your program officer and they will be happy to either provide you with a direct link or PDF copy. Lastly, the state of New Jersey has requirements that our grantees need to comply with, and they are all explained in tab 3 of your grant manual. These requirements can be somewhat nuanced and complex, so it is really important that your CFO reviews tab 3 of your grant manual in depth to familiarize themselves with the requirements. One of those requirements is the audit requirement. If your organization receives more than $350,000 in state and/or federal grants in any given fiscal year, you will be required to submit an audit. While none of your historic trust grants will be more than $350,000, your organization may be receiving grants from other federal or state entities in a single fiscal year. If those combined amounts exceed $350,000, you will be required to submit an audit. Audit costs are not reimbursable expenses, so your organization will have to budget for the cost of the audit outside of this project. Our grants also have an affirmative action requirement. Our grantees, their consultants, and contractors are required to comply with the state of New Jersey's affirmative action laws. It is especially important that you have the non-discrimination language and policy in any proposals or contracts related to your grant-funded activities. Your consultants are going to be required to show proof of compliance to the state contract compliance unit through the Department of Treasury. There are a few ways they can demonstrate this compliance, and more information regarding that can be found in the grant manual. If you have any specific questions about affirmative action compliance, they should be directed to the contract compliance unit. That concludes the defining of the scope of work section. And if there are No questions. We'll move on to archaeology.
I don't see any questions, so we're just going to keep on trucking.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alexis Alamy, and I'm the Trust Staff Archaeologist, and I'm going to briefly review the archaeological requirements of trust-funded projects. So first of all, when is archaeology required? We know that many historic site management grants involve activities that lay the groundwork for future capital projects. Because of this, you may be required to address archaeology in some of your work products, including within preservation plans, construction drawings and specifications, planning documents that outline future ground disturbing activities, and a variety of other documents. For example, if your preservation plan is proposing to correct drainage issues through below ground improvements such as new drainage piping or trenching to examine or repair the foundation, it should also consider whether archaeology will need to occur in connection with that improvement in the future and should make recommendations accordingly. Generally speaking, trust-funded projects require the consideration of archaeology for projects involving ground disturbance. I won't read this full list, but some examples of the kinds of activities that have required archaeological consideration in past trust projects include the excavation of trenches for utility service and site drainage, excavation related to ADA site improvements, and the construction or expansion of walkways, driveways, and parking areas. If you're actively planning for any of these kinds of projects and are considering trust funding for any of them, please also remember to keep potential archaeological requirements in mind well in advance of construction. If archaeology is a component of your project and you haven't done so already, your next step should be to select a qualified professional archaeologist and involve them in your project early on. After meeting with them to discuss the project, you should solicit a proposal from them which describes the planned archaeological approach. Additionally, the trust must be provided a work plan for review prior to proceeding with the investigation, which might be included within that proposal. Once that's been approved, archaeology should begin, and the resulting report must be submitted to the trust for review. The trust will submit final approved reports to the Historic Preservation Office on your behalf. Keep in mind that archaeology may need to be completed in phases. So, for example, you may have a phase 1 survey completed, which indicates a need for additional survey. Just please be sure to review the results of the archaeological investigation and take them into consideration as you make plans for future work to be completed on your site. There are fact sheets available on the Trust website, which answer frequently asked questions, outline some of the survey and reporting requirements, and guidelines related to the preparation of archaeological monitoring protocols. I point these out for convenience, but we're always happy to meet with you to discuss your projects in more detail. Not every project will require archaeological consideration, and the extent to which archaeology will need to be addressed will vary on a site-by-site and project-specific basis. So just be sure to keep in touch with your program officer to make sure any requirements are being met. If archaeology is a required or included component of your project, it will be included in the D1 scope of work discussed previously in the presentation. And if there are no questions now, I'll turn this over to Shannon, who's going to be reviewing how to administer your active grant.
Alrighty, I don't see any questions. So, hi, as Alexis said, my name is Shannon Bremer. I'm going to be walking you through administering an active grant. Before we begin, I just want to make a note that everything covered in this section can be found in Chapter 4 of your grantee manual. So if you miss anything, you can always refer back to that section. When administering an active grant, one of the key things that can help you move your project along smoothly is communication with your program officer. Whether it's in the early stages before a project even begins or during the drafting process of your project, I cannot stress enough how much good communication or lack thereof can impact your project. Some things that you will need to send along to the trust throughout the life of your project include drafts of the planning documents being funded by the grant, any contracts with the consultants that will be preparing the grant-funded work products, as well as quarterly reports and reimbursement requests. At the closeout of your project, you will need to provide us with one hard copy and one digital copy of all grant-funded documents. You will also need to submit your final report along with your final reimbursement requests. If you have yet to select a consultant, So you don't have one and you didn't include one in your application, you do need to provide the trust with sufficient documentation on your consultant for us to determine if they meet the federal qualification standards. If you did select a consultant and you included all that information in your application, you do not have to resubmit their qualifications unless that consultant has changed since your application. Throughout the project, we do ask that you invite us to any project meetings, especially the project kickoff meeting. While we might not be able to attend every single meeting that you invite us to, we do want to be aware of what's going on, and we do try to attend as many as we can so that we can get to know each of you, as well as your projects better. If there are particular meetings where you know important things are going to be discussed, or decisions need to be made, please tell us and we'll do our best to prioritize attendance at those meetings. You, as the grantee, are responsible for communication with the trust. Effective and constant communication allows us to all work together to accomplish the goals of your grant-funded project. So as I mentioned before, another way you'll be communicating with us is through quarterly reporting. You're responsible for submitting this report on or by the dates that you see on this slide, so that'll be 4 reports in total. That first quarterly report is the most important because it sets the baseline for your project. All the details of what needs to be included in your quarterly reports can be found in both your grant manual as well as your executed grant agreement once you have that in hand. If you are looking for the quarterly reporting forms in your executed grant agreement, they start on page C1, which you see here on the slide. Follow the checklist at the top of the page to ensure that you have all required information, such as your current project status, project narrative description, your team list, so anyone that's working on the project, current project schedule, and certification that the report is accurately completed to the best of your ability. You will also include any submissions you may have when you submit this report as well. If there's no reimbursement request, you can submit this report via email. However, if a reimbursement is being requested with the report, we do ask that you send it via postal delivery since we do require original signatures for the payment voucher. If your project is at a lull and you have no activity to report because things are just being drafted and there's not really any big changes going on, we do ask that you still fill out a quick report and send it along to us via email so we know what's going on. This will help keep an open chain of communication between you and your program officer. So once you have a fully executed grant agreement in hand, along with a signed consultant contract, you can request the first of your 2 reimbursements. So unlike our capital grant program, which does reimbursements as you spend money, our HSM, Heritage Tourism, and Municipal County Regional Planning grant programs only have 2 reimbursements, an initial one and then a closeout one. Your initial reimbursement is going to give you 80% of your grant award upfront. So for that initial reimbursement, we only require that you show proof of your initial retainer or a first invoice. Your final closeout reimbursement will be for the remaining 20% of your grant award. In order to receive the full 20%, all work product must be complete and approved, and you must show that you reach the minimum total project cost required for your grant award. If you do not meet the minimum total project costs, don't panic. You still will be receiving the percentage that you're eligible for. It just may not be that full 20%. The most important form in your reimbursement request is your payment voucher. We cannot process your reimbursement without it, so please quadruple check your request before mailing it in to make sure first and foremost that 1, you included it, and that 2nd, you filled it out correctly. The image that you see on the slide is an example of what the payment voucher looks like. So if you copy the voucher included in your executed grant agreement, some of the information, such as your project number and the name of your project, will already be filled out for you. And as I mentioned before, we do require the original ink signature of your designated CFO or treasurer on this. Payment is disbursed after fiscal review. This part can take anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks after receipt of a fully complete reimbursement package. This can be delayed, as Carrie mentioned, if you don't have this form sent in with your reimbursement and we have to ask you for it, that's going to delay you even further from getting your money. So that's why it's so important to make sure it's in your package. And then when you register for direct deposit payments through the state's ACH system, that can also help expedite the payment process. So we highly recommend doing that if you're able to. Before any work product can be considered final, it must be reviewed by the trust to ensure that it meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, as well as our preparation guide for preservation plans and HSRs if those are the documents being funded. Once you have at least an 80% complete draft of your work product, you should send those along to your program officer for review and comment. If we're funding construction documents or design documents for future capital work, and you would like more input during the process to ensure that everything meets the standards, we absolutely recommend working with your program officer more regularly than just submitting that 180% draft. Please allow at least 4 weeks for review and comment from your program officer. Once the trust has reviewed and approved your final draft, after comments have been addressed, the work product can then be considered final and complete. As mentioned before, once your final product has been approved, we do need 1 hard copy and 1 digital copy upon closeout of your grant. So sometimes there are situations that arise that may require you to amend your grant agreement. That could be something like changes to your project schedule, changes to your scope of work, or even a change in your consultant. The attachment D2, or the request for major change, is included in your executed grant agreement. All requests should be completed before the end of the work period or grant agreement deadline. Once submitted, they are reviewed by our Grants and Loans Committee, and if approved, they will be forwarded to our full board for final approval. Before requesting any major change, please make sure you are speaking with your program officer so that they're aware of what's going on and so they can assist you through the process. Requests for major change are not always approved, so make sure that you have all necessary documentation and support for your request. This includes any extension requests for your work period and/or agreement expiration date. There are times when delays are caused by circumstances beyond your control, so to the fullest extent possible, you should try to make sure that your project stays on schedule, but we do understand if something major happens that, you might need some flexibility. Getting an extension for your grant is not guaranteed, and the Trust Grants and Loans Committee will not automatically grant an extension. It will have to be fully justified. The general terms and conditions of the grant agreement are non-negotiable. And I see one question that came in. Do you need to change the project schedule or revise scope of work prior to submitting the grant agreement? If there's a major scope of work change that you'll need to definitely talk to your program officer about. There hopefully shouldn't be any major change in your scope of work from what you had applied for versus, what you're doing now. So I highly encourage, reaching out to your individual program officer to discuss those things. That just helps with formulating your grant agreement and making sure that all your scope of work pages do, align with exactly what you're doing. So that'll be done in that kind of process before, pretty much after your info packet is submitted and when you're in discussions with your program officer and getting ready to generate your grant agreement and make it. And then with that, I'm going to transition to Jen, who's going to talk about what happens when you're ready to close out.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer, and we'll now talk about closing out your grant. So, while it may be some time before anyone here closes out their grant, it's still important now to go through the process so that you are well prepared at the time the project closes. And a closeout can occur, as Shannon said, after the trust has reviewed and approved all work to date. And this process is very important because you will not receive the remaining balance of your grant until you submit the completed closeout paperwork. And I'm going to repeat that. You will not receive the remaining balance of your grant until your closeout paperwork is submitted and approved by the trust. Now, for historic site management, heritage tourism, and MCRP grants, you must submit all final deliverables from your approved scope of work items to your program officer at the trust. This includes preservation plans, National Register nominations, ordinances, and whatever it is, it needs to be submitted in hard copy and digital formats. Your program officer will review the documents and give the final approval. In addition to submitting your final work products, you will also need to complete the C2 form included with your grant agreement. And the C2 form is the final reimbursement request and report. So please follow the itemized checklist on this form. Items included in the checklist include a brief project narrative and copies of all invoices and canceled checks or proofs of payments that were not part of your initial reimbursement. We will also need your payment voucher, which is also included with your grant agreement, with the original signature in blue or red ink from your CFO. And I can't stress this enough. Please follow this itemized checklist on this C2 form. If anything is left out, it will delay your final reimbursement. And once everything is submitted and approved, your program officer will then be able to file the paperwork for the disbursement of the final 20% of your grant award. And if you want more information, please refer to Chapter 4 of the HSM Grant Manual that has great descriptions on how to complete the closeout forms. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please call or email us. And if there are no questions, I will turn it over to Ashley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Parker. I am a historic preservation specialist as well as the heritage tourism coordinator here at the Trust. And today I will be going over how publicity can play an important role for your project. So publicity helps maintain visibility of your project and organization during the preservation campaign. It can increase attendance and/or membership for programs and activities at your site, and can also attract new funding, support, and additional resources. Publicizing your project also promotes and raises awareness of history and historic preservation in New Jersey. This helps ensure ongoing funding for historic preservation. Good publicity opportunities are grant award announcements and check presentations, project milestones such as groundbreaking or ribbon cutting ceremonies, tours, special events, or profiles on volunteers, staff, or special craftsmen, or letters to your legislatures and representatives. These opportunities can be achieved by news or journal articles about your project, social media posts, or special televised news coverage. If you're interested in coordinating a check presentation or grant award announcement, please contact your program officer. We have a large check for presentations that looks great in photos, and we're very eager to use it. Additionally, your site may be eligible for inclusion on Journey Through Jersey, the state's go-to website for all things heritage tourism that was launched by the Trust in 2017. This website features heritage tourism destinations throughout the state in addition to annual events, educational resources, blog posts, and travel itineraries, which are also featured on Journey Through Jersey's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also host unique educational opportunities for Journey Through Jersey site managers. 10 Journey Through Jersey participants received complimentary registration to the Travel and Tourism Conference for the past couple of years. We highly encourage you to nominate your visitor-ready site. Journey Through Jersey will publicize your resource for free. You will receive a welcome packet upon joining that will include window decals and postcards with a QR code that links visitors to the Journey Through Jersey website. We only ask that if you are a participating resource, that you include the Journey Through Jersey logo with the link to the website on your organization's website. If you would like to learn more about Journey Through Jersey, would like to be featured, or are interested in contributing a blog post, please contact me directly. My contact information can be found at the end of this presentation and on the Trust's website. And finally, help us help you promote your project by staying in touch with us. The Trust is active on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We encourage you to tag us in posts, send us news coverage, progress photos, events, or any other content that you would like us to share. There's no guarantees, but we do try to post as much as we can. We also kindly ask that you reshare our posts and link to our website in order to help us raise awareness about funding opportunities and historic preservation in New Jersey. And at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague Olivia to address any additional questions that you may have.
Hi, everyone. It looks like we don't have any questions right now. Could our attendees just take a minute and send in any questions if you have any remaining? We have a question asking, how do we find out who our program officer is? You should have received an email recently that contains your info packet and your award letter, and in that email, it will say who your program officer is, along with their contact information. We have a question asking, the work outlined in your original scope could start after the original submission of the grant. Yes, that is still acceptable. However, you will still have to complete the rest of the process as we have outlined. So you will still need to send in your info packet and complete the documents that we described in the presentation.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that too, Olivia, is again, hopefully you were keeping the trust kind of in the loop as the work continued. Because again, all of our stuff needs to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So that's one thing we will be reviewing. So as long as the work started after the day after the applications were due and the work meets all the standards, and that's fine. Yes, we'll still have to do a grant agreement and all the paperwork for the reimbursement. But yeah, as long as that all meets the standards, we should be good.
We have a question asking, how detailed should the audit be? We are
So
the municipal. Go ahead.
the audit thresholds are, as Judy explained, if you have $350,000 or more, you'll be required an audit, and that's combination of state and federal. If you have less than $1 million, it's a pretty simple GAO Yellow Book audit that is program specific. The threshold for a single audit, which would be that big lengthy one that you're talking about for your municipality, that would be if you received $1 million or more from state and federal combination of grants. So there are different types of audits. They're in your grant agreement, the specifications and what is required depending on how much you've received in a fiscal year.
All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions.
All right, since there are no more questions, I'd like to thank the staff for providing this presentation today. Again, this workshop will be available probably next week, through our website if you want to go back and look at anything. But again, look for it. If you haven't received the info packet, look for it. Your program officer will be listed there. And always never hesitate to ask questions of anyone here at the staff. We'd rather help you up front rather than have to make changes later. But we're always available to help answer your questions. Actually, I see another one.
We have one more pop in. If you
Yeah,
don't
it's
have
another
an
one dealing with
independent
the
audit,
independent audit. Is an annual financial statement acceptable? Actually, has correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, but it has to be an audit by a certified auditor.
That's right. It has to be performed by an outside auditor or auditing firm, and they have to be peer reviewed. They have to have all their certifications up to date. And it can be something like a financial statement, like a GAO Yellow Book financial statement. Again, if you're 350,000 to 1 million, that would probably be acceptable. But it always has to be performed by an independent auditor outside of your organization. And that financial statement, your auditor will know the details of what needs to be provided when you hit that threshold.
Yeah, when you get the grant agreement, all that stuff, as Carrie and Judy mentioned, is all outlined there. You might want to just show it to whoever does your audits or financials, just so they understand what's required, and they'll be able to direct you for specifics. But again, I'm going to say we're all done, but another question. about the grantee info packet board resolution for nonprofits. Does it have to be a chairperson, secretary, notary, or is a chairperson and notary okay? Yeah, I mean, as long as, I mean, someone has to certify that the person signed it, whether that's your secretary and or your notary. Again, typically it is more so we see a notary doing it because you need that seal on the acknowledgements page. So hopefully that answered that. Well, again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Congratulations once again for receiving this grant. I know it's not an easy process and it is highly competitive, so pat yourselves on the back for getting this far, and we look forward to working with you throughout this grant process and your projects. Again, thank you, and again, this should be available next week sometime on our website. But thanks.